welcome to our unit over the French Neoclassical. So, the art academies had really established this hierarchy of painting. I've referenced it before, but at the top of the hierarchy are these history paintings, then portraits, genre, landscape, and still life. And so what we're seeing now in the well-established neoclassical era is the reemergence of history painting. So think of before, we just had a celebration of the aristocracy with our Rococo. And as we were transitioning into that, we were still looking at the aristocracy. But now we're in the neoclassical era, again, which was really influenced by the rediscovery of Herculaneum. And this helps to encourage this interest in these ancient Greek and Roman artifacts, and those items are being bought up and spread, and these individuals, these wealthier young males are going on these grand tours, and so they're also going to Italy. And so these ancient Greek and Roman ideas resurge once again. And so what we see is this major difference between the frivolous celebration of the aristocracy, these genre scenes of the aristocrats, these loose brushstrokes, these floral motifs, a lighter color palette, looser brushstrokes, themes of love. Whereas now what we're going to see with the Oath of the Horatii is these much more precise and rectilinear lines. We have our classical elements, we have our classical themes, our classical subject matter, and they're also going to really emphasize this moral nature. So think of the previous portrait we were looking at with the idea of the good mother, which is a direct reaction against the aristocracy at this time period. That's what they're criticizing the aristocracy for, that they were acting immorally, they weren't taking good care of the people. And so here we have, compared to the satire of the aristocracy, etc. Here we have Jacques-LouisDavid's The Oath of the Horatii. And so when you think of the neoclassical period, I want you to think of this painting. This helps to define it. And so we have these interests that we've kind of seen before with the Renaissance in terms of these idealized bodies. We have a classical subject matter. We'll talk about the Roman story in a moment. What we're also seeing is a linear perspective. So we have these orthogonal lines that would lead to a vanishing point behind these swords. We also have this organized composition. We have these columns and arches, which are very classical. Again, subject matter is classical. And so let's discuss this actual artwork. So this is a Roman story of this battle between the Horatii and the Curiati, and how they had decided that essentially they were going to send in three of their best warriors, and it ends up these three are triplets. Each side is going to send these three gentlemen to battle one another, and they are going to be the ones who will determine who's the winner of this war. And so here we see the scene before, of where these three triplets, these three brothers, are pledging their allegiance, essentially declaring their loyalty as their father hands them their swords. And then behind them, this other group of three, complementary, of women are mourning. But let's consider how they're mourning. If we were thinking Baroque, we think of these dramatic mourners. But now we're in this neoclassical emphasis on morality, emphasis on doing what's right, and so they're much more restrained. These are husbands, these are the wives. They know their husbands may not come back. And in fact, one of them was actually originally a Curiati, and so she has both sides of her family's lives on the line here. But they're restrained. They aren't overly dramatic. Yes, they're sad, but they know that it is their husband's duty to do what is right for their state, for their country. And so this is going to coincide with our revolution. With this ideal, moral, doing what's right for country. And so we're seeing this antithesis to the Rococo. this was actually patronized by the king, interestingly enough. And so they're very aware of the criticisms against them, of this revolution that's stirring. And so he patronizes this work in an attempt to reinforce this idea of loyalty to the state. As you can imagine, it is a little bit, it backfires on him, because instead people are emphasizing how the state isn't taking care of them, the king. So, here's the Oath of the Hirashi, Neoclassical. Here's what I want you to think of when you think of Neoclassical. Notice the date, 1784. We're right on the horizon of the beginning of the revolution. They're also looking to Renaissance artists. Again, they're traveling to Italy, so they're claiming these classical elements from the Renaissance as well. And so we're going to look at this Death of Marat, where Jacques-LouisDavid again looked directly to Michelangelo's Pietà here. And so we see this martyr, right? This crucified Christ. And so this is the Death of Marat, 1793. So we have already begun the revolution. So what we're seeing here is actually a revolutionary martyr. He was one of the main people in the forefront of the revolution. As you can see, he's even in his bath, planning out these ideas of the revolution. Jacques-LouisDavid knew him. He becomes the painter of the revolution. So these are some of our key figures. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, both of these paintings are very large. With these history paintings, they're very large. This one is about 4 feet long, in fact. David had joined the military faction of this revolution. It's a difficult time period. As they later depose of the king and queen, there's even the Reign of Terror, where they're basically rounding up all the nobility and forcing them to the guillotine. So here we see part of this death, violence. And this is when Marat had been martyred, where he had been killed. And so they're arguing that art should contribute to educate the public, that it should be this agent of change. And so here we have Marat, which is made in a way to help to garner more support for the revolution. He looks idealized. The reason he's taking a bath and why he's writing here and even has a desk, this tells us that this was a normal occurrence, because he had this really bad skin condition, which was really painful. It was across his whole body. We're not quite sure what it was, but it was this really debilitating chronic skin disease. And so he often had to take these baths for some relief. And so while sitting there, he would write these revolutionary documents. But here we don't see any of those issues with his skin, because Jacques-LouisDavid is showing him in an idealized way. So he was writing, and this lady, Charlotte Corday, came and announced that she was a messenger for another figure of the revolution. And so she's brought up to him, and she's asking him some questions and ends up stabbing him to death. And so we see the knife wound here and this blood dripping down. So again, he's pulling from these classical elements. When it comes to like the death of Christ and this idea of a martyr. So it's to show him as a martyr, to show that he's a hero of the revolution, and to help people to know that the fight is not done yet. Her name is even written on the letter of who killed her. France's current flag today, this tricolor flag, was actually even created by Jacques-LouisDavid. The argument was it's this unity of the people and the king, but the king is to act in a more constrained way for the people. It's the hope for unity. So, French Revolution, 89 to 99. 93, the royal family is executed, including the children. This begins the Reign of Terror. So this is where I was discussing where many people are executed, sent to the guillotines, where if you were part of the nobility and you hadn't yet escaped, you were essentially killed. You can imagine this is extremely chaotic. Once the king is gone, they don't really have a clear plan. And so amidst this chaos, we have the Emperor Napoleon who seizes power. This military general from 1799 to 815. We have the French Empire under Napoleon. So we're going to look at an example of propaganda, another one. So this is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Many of the artworks that we study are examples of propaganda to even our Marie Antoinette and her children was a form of propaganda, but it's to help persuade public opinion towards something. And so in this case, it is to show Napoleon is extremely powerful. So here we have Napoleon crossing the Alps. And this is one of 5 versions. So here's a few others. Skipping ahead of myself. Some of the coloring is different. But let's compare it to another one done later, post-death, 1850. After Napoleon has passed on, the empire ends in 1815. And so now we're looking at Napoleon in a different light, right? Where he's crossing the Alps. He looks very cold. He's hunched over. Looks a little weak. It's not as regal as this equestrian statue. And so this was to show him as this powerful general. I mean, he's in control of himself. Look at how he has this serious expression despite his horse bucking up. And look at even the redness of the horse's eyes. We can imagine him neighing loudly. This shriek, and the wind is whipping through them as they're crossing the treacherous Alps. Yet he is in control of his body. He is restrained. I think back to the wives that we saw in the Sister for the Oath of Hiroshi. Now, equestrian statues have long been used as a form to show power. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, did so. Here's one of numerous examples. And so he's utilizing what's been already established as a sign of power. Equestrian statue means where they're on this horse. Here are his troops pushing the cannons. We have it's treacherous, it's rocky, but it would have been much more difficult than what's shown. It would have been more like that other later depiction of him with snow, etc. And so what's also happening is this form of propaganda is that he's riding a horse. But to cross these mountains, you would have actually been on a mule, because only they can handle the terrain of a mountainous region. But we're showing him on a horse. He's also, just like Marcus Aurelius, which Jacques-LouisDavid may have seen, but either way, he's also much larger than he would be in real life. On this horse, his proportions are bigger. He would be smaller on a horse. FYI, just a side note. So the rumor that Napoleon was very short in stature isn't accurate. That was a form of, obviously, effective propaganda. He was just of completely average height. Obviously an incredible general, because he did win. He did have this empire, took over much of Europe. And so here we see him in his full glory. And these versions are in different museums around the globe today. I've seen a couple of them. Different color palette, but again, it's helping to disseminate this message. Here is Marie Guerlain-Benoit, a portrait of Madeleine from 1800. So this portrait, remember, we're our second level on the hierarchy. It was exhibited at one of the major exhibitions. We see her painting right here. Second level. And so she was a valued painter. This was prized. It was written about and celebrated. And so what we're seeing here is a female, and arguably, so you could argue that it's a real person, and some have determined that it's this Lady Madeleine. We're not really sure, because some argue that it's actually a symbol of France. So let's discuss a little bit of the context real quick. And we have 1794, slavery is abolished in the French colonies and in France, but in 1802, Napoleon reinstates slavery. This had been on a discussion and on the forefront of Napoleon's takeover in 99. And so this painting was made while this issue was being discussed. There was this anticipation of Napoleon reinstating it in 1800 when this was made. And so the argument is that, and then slavery isn't ended again until 1848, is that it's an allegory for France. Because in numerous allegories, so where a figure will represent an idea, one breast is uncovered. And so here we have one breast that's uncovered, and we have the incorporation of the symbols of France. We have the blue, the white, and the red. And so the argument is that this is a personification of France, that she represents France. And so it's this statement against reinstating slavery, of the humanity of France, of the humanity of those who'd already been enslaved, and trying to garner support for Napoleon not to reinstate slavery, which he does. And so, I love this one where it's interesting because she's gazing at the viewer. Her breast is shown, but it's not this erotic portrait whatsoever. She was very regal in terms of her posture. You can tell that the artist was extremely meticulous and careful in making sure that this wasn't any type of erotic undertones or sensual or enticing or anything. So I lean on the side of how this is likely this personification, this allegory of Paris. So it's just beautiful. Some neoclassical architecture. So think back to how during the Renaissance we were looking at these arches. Notice how it's just one way, going under these arches. But here we have the Arc de Triomphe. And this is this four-way arch, the larger one, the smaller one. And so they're starting to look to ancient Greece and Rome for architecture. We'll talk later about how many of these ancient, some neoclassical, not so much, are later torn down as they replan Paris. But we'll go into some more architecture with America tomorrow.